Y'all, I have to tell you something that happened in the Atlantic Ocean this week that I genuinely did not expect to be reporting. And I want to be clear that when I use the word shocking in this video's title, I am not reaching for drama. I am describing the accurate meteorological reaction of every tropical weather forecaster I have been reading, watching, and talking to over the past 48 hours. Because on Wednesday morning, August 13th, a tropical storm formed in the central Atlantic Ocean. The National Hurricane Center gave it a name, Tropical Storm Cristobal, the third named storm of the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. A named storm with the organizational structure and the wind speeds that meet the NHC's criteria for tropical storm classification, spinning in the Atlantic basin and carrying all the meteorological significance that a named storm carries at the statistical heart of hurricane season. And then, 24 hours later, on Thursday morning, August 14th, the NHC reported that Cristobal had degenerated into a remnant low, 24 hours. The third named storm of the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season formed and died within a single day. Not weakened significantly, not dropped back to a tropical depression, degenerated into a remnant low, the classification the NHC uses for the last identifiable shreds of a tropical system that no longer has the organized structure of a cyclone. Cristobal was born on Wednesday and was gone by Thursday morning. And the reason it happened, the specific atmospheric mechanism that killed a named tropical storm in less than a day, is the same mechanism that makes every other system trying to develop in this basin right now a story worth watching. And the story of what is trying to develop, what is failing to develop, and why it is so hard to develop in this particular August of this particular year is genuinely one of the most scientifically interesting tropical weather narratives in recent memory. So let me walk you through all of it. The shear first, because the shear is everything in this story. Colorado State University tropical scientist Phil Klotzbach, one of the most respected voices in Atlantic hurricane season science anywhere in the world, confirmed something this week that explains not just Cristobal's rapid death, but the entire character of the 2026 Atlantic season. The wind shear in the Caribbean and Eastern Atlantic has been the strongest on record due to the intensifying El Nino. The strongest on record. Not high, not elevated, not above normal. The strongest in the entire recorded history of wind shear measurements in the Caribbean and Eastern Atlantic. That is a statement so significant that I want to make sure it does not get lost in the other details of this morning's update. The El Nino that has been suppressing the Atlantic basin all summer has been doing so with a ferocity that exceeds anything in the modern observational record. And it is intensifying, not holding steady, intensifying. Through August, September, and October, the peak of hurricane season, the months when historically the basin produces its most significant and most dangerous storms, the El Nino signal is expected to continue strengthening. The shear that killed Cristobal in 24 hours is not a temporary feature of this week's atmosphere. It is a growing, intensifying, season-defining feature that every tropical wave and every developing disturbance in the Atlantic is going to have to fight through for the foreseeable future. Tropical storm Cristobal formed well east of Bermuda and west of the Azores, in the subtropical North Atlantic, which is not the typical nursery for significant hurricane season storms. The storms that matter most for the Gulf Coast and the East Coast, the Cape Verde storms that have historically produced the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes, form in the deep tropics, in the main development region between Africa and the Caribbean, not in the subtropical Atlantic. Cristobal's birthplace in the higher latitude Atlantic was itself a signal of what the El Nino shear was doing to the basin. The shear across the main development region was so hostile that the only place a system could manage to organize at all was in the subtropical Atlantic, where the El Nino's influence on upper-level winds is somewhat less extreme. And even there, in what was presumably the most favorable environment available in the basin, the atmosphere still managed to tear the system apart in 24 hours. That is a vivid illustration of just how powerful the current shear environment is. Now, let me tell you about the systems that are still being tracked this morning, because the tropical story is not just about Cristobal's brief and dramatic appearance and disappearance. There are other disturbances in the pipeline, and the NHC's latest tropical weather discussion from 1815 UTC August 13th, just yesterday evening, is tracking them specifically and giving them meaningful attention. Invest 92L is the primary system the NHC is watching with the most significant development probability. Earlier in the week, before the most recent NHC tropical weather discussion, Fox Weather's hurricane team was reporting that the NHC had given the system a 70% development chance in the next 7 days, a designation they specifically flagged as the reason for Invest 92L's formal designation as a system worth investigating with high-resolution models. As of the 1815 UTC discussion from August 13th, however, showers and thunderstorms in association with the tropical wave along 45 degrees west have become less organized. That is the NHC's language for what the shear did to Invest 92L over the past 24 to 36 hours. The same shear that killed Cristobal organized itself against Invest 92L as well, and suppressed the convective organization that had been trying to develop around the system. Less organized is the atmospheric equivalent of watching something try to build and then watching the wind knock it down before it can get traction. But here is the piece of the Invest 92L story that makes this morning's situation genuinely interesting, rather than just uniformly discouraging for tropical development. The system continues to move westward, and the question of what it encounters as it approaches the Lesser Antilles and eventually the Western Caribbean is not the same question as what it has encountered in the Eastern Atlantic. The main development region between Africa and the Caribbean is where the El Niño shear is most extreme. As systems move westward into the Caribbean, the shear environment can vary significantly depending on the specific configuration of the upper-level flow at any given moment. There are pockets of the Western Caribbean where the shear, while still elevated relative to a normal season, is less uniformly hostile than what the Eastern Atlantic has been offering. If Invest 92L can maintain any degree of low-level organization as it tracks westward, if it can hold together enough that the system structure survives the crossing of the Lesser Antilles and enters the Caribbean with something resembling a coherent circulation, then the question of what happens to it in the Caribbean is genuinely open, not likely to develop in the current environment, not impossible. And the weather modeling community will be watching every run of every model for the next several days for any sign that the Western Caribbean environment provides a more welcoming window for this system than the Eastern Atlantic has. Invest 94L is the second disturbance the NHC is tracking, located in the far Eastern Atlantic, hundreds of miles behind Invest 92L in the wave pipeline. It is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms, and the NHC's latest assessment is that its development chances are decreasing. At this stage, Invest 94L is the system I'm watching for the medium range rather than the immediate range. It is going to be spending the next 7 to 10 days traversing the eastern and central Atlantic. And the question of what environment it finds when it gets there is entirely dependent on whether the El Niño shear pattern shows any significant variation over that time period. It could arrive in a Caribbean that is slightly more favorable than the current environment, or it could arrive in conditions as hostile as those that killed Cristobal in 24 hours. The models are still working that out. The NHC's tropical weather discussion from August 13th also includes something that I want to make sure every person with maritime interests in the Caribbean hears clearly, because it is directly relevant to anyone on the water in the South Central Caribbean this week. A Caribbean gale warning was issued as a special feature in that discussion. The pressure gradient between subtropical high pressure across the Western Atlantic and lower pressure over northern South America is forecast to tighten late this week behind a passing tropical wave, increasing trade winds across the eastern and central Caribbean and forcing gales to develop Friday evening in the Gulf of Venezuela and offshore Colombia. Gale force winds Friday evening. Very rough seas, building to 15 feet near and downwind of these gales in the southwest Caribbean Friday night into early Saturday. 15-foot seas in the southwest Caribbean. That is a genuinely dangerous marine environment for any vessel not designed for heavy weather operations, and the timing, Friday evening into early Saturday, overlaps with the period when weekend recreational boating activity in the region is at its highest. Please, anyone planning to be on the water in the South Central Caribbean this weekend, check the NHC's high seas forecast and the latest marine discussion before you go out. These are real, instrument-confirmed, officially forecast gale conditions and 15-foot seas. They are not to be taken lightly. Let me zoom out now from the day-to-day tracking of Invest 92L and Invest 94L and the Caribbean gale warning and give you the full, honest picture of where the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season stands as of this morning, because I think that bigger picture is the most important context for everything I have described. NOAA issued their updated 2026 Atlantic hurricane season outlook on August 6th, 1 week ago. And the numbers in that update tell the story of El Niño's dominance over this season as clearly as any single data point can. NOAA now forecasts 7 to 13 named storms for the full season, 2 to 6 hurricanes, and 0 to 2 major hurricanes. They assign a 75% probability of a below normal season, 75%. 3 out of every 4 scenarios the modeling community can construct for the remainder of this season end with below normal activity. NOAA included a specific note in their update that I think is worth repeating verbatim because it captures both the honest current picture and the critical caveat that every Gulf Coast and an East Coast community needs to hear. They noted that to date the 2026 season has produced 2 named tropical storms, Arthur and Bertha, and no hurricanes. And then they added, with the climatological peak of hurricane season approaching in early September, their prediction for below normal activity in the Atlantic basin remains below normal, but approaching the peak. Those two things can both be true at the same time, and the truth of both of them simultaneously is the most important weather message I can send to every community on the Gulf and East Coast this morning. The shocking thing about Cristobal, the thing that has tropical meteorologists talking, and that justifies every bit of the word shocking in this video's title, is not just that a named storm died in 24 hours. It is what that 24-hour death tells us about how powerful the El Niño shear is right now, at this moment, in this season. Named tropical storms are not casual formations. They require a sustained set of favorable conditions: warm water below, adequate moisture, and low wind shear in the environment, a pre-existing organized circulation to develop and maintain themselves. A named storm that cannot survive 24 hours has encountered an atmospheric environment that is so hostile that it overwhelmed all of those necessary conditions simultaneously and in a very short time. The shear did not just nudge Cristobal, it executed it. And if the strongest wind shear on record in the Caribbean and Eastern Atlantic can execute a named tropical storm in 24 hours, it tells you something about what every other system in the basin is fighting right now. Every wave that has been trying to develop this month has been fighting that same shear. Every wave that has failed to develop has been beaten by that same shear. The suppression is not gentle, it is total. And yet, and here's the thing that I never want to say without saying this alongside it, because the two truths belong together, El Niño suppression is not the same as El Niño prevention. The season has produced named storms. It will produce more named storms. It may produce hurricanes before the season ends. The record strength shear has been killing systems in 24 hours. It has also, at moments, allowed systems to organize and reach tropical storm strength before it killed them. The gap between organizing enough to get a name and organizing enough to become a hurricane that threatens a coastline is a real and meaningful gap. Most of the systems in this season's basin are going to fall short of that gap. Some will not. And the ones that do not, the ones that find a window of reduced shear, that get into the Gulf of America where the sea surface temperatures are above normal and the upper ocean heat content supports rapid intensification, that make a run at the coast with more intensity than the seasonal averages would suggest, are the ones that matter for the 14 million people living in surge zones along the Gulf and East coasts. The next named storm will be Dolly. Based on the current tracking, if either Invest 92L or Invest 94L manages to develop into a named storm, Dolly is what we will be talking about. And if Dolly forms with any degree of organization as it approaches or enters the Caribbean or the Gulf of America, the above-average sea surface temperatures and above-average upper ocean heat content in the Gulf create a rapid intensification environment that is as energetically favorable as anything the Gulf has offered in recent years. A Dolly that enters the Gulf of America even as a weak tropical storm in the current Gulf environment could become a significantly more dangerous system within 36 to 48 hours. I am not forecasting that outcome. I am telling you that the physical environment makes it possible in a way that demands respect from every Gulf Coast community that has been watching this quiet season with a sense of relief. Set up. Y'all call before you go to sleep tonight. Because the outer rain bands of a Gulf system, even a modest one, even a system that is only at tropical storm strength when it approaches the coast, can produce tornadoes in the early morning hours that arrive before any official hurricane watch or warning is issued for your county. A direct phone call to your number when a tornado warning covers your exact location, cutting through Do Not Disturb, ringing until you answer, is the protection that keeps people safe in the overnight hours when the warnings are real and the push notifications are suppressed. $14.95 for a full year. The link is in the description. Please set it up today. I want to close by naming something that I think this season has been quietly teaching us, week by week, event by event, from Cristobal's shocking 24-hour lifespan back through every wave that has crossed the Atlantic and failed to develop. The 2026 Atlantic hurricane season is, scientifically, one of the most interesting seasons in the modern record. Not because of what it has produced, but because of the power of the mechanism that is preventing it from producing. The strongest wind shear on record in the Caribbean and Eastern Atlantic. A named storm that lived for 24 hours. 75% probability of a below normal season from NOAA. Phil Klotzbach's record strength shear confirmation. These are not routine season statistics. They are the data points of an El Niño that is expressing its dominance over the Atlantic basin with a thoroughness that the observational record has never documented before. And yet, the season continues. The waves roll off Africa. The Gulf sits warm. The calendar ticks toward September 10th. And somewhere in the pipeline of systems that the NHC is tracking this morning, Invest 92L at 45 degrees west, Invest 94L in the far eastern Atlantic, the waves behind them still forming over West Africa, One of them is eventually going to find a window, and when it does, I will be right here to tell you about it the moment the data shows me. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. Share this video with your family on the Gulf and East coasts. And as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.